Hello, welcome to Dancing Conversation TWISTalk. We three queens of body and mind. My name is Kat Wentz, and I am NCC Akron's Programs Manager. Dancing Conversations are free public events that locate dance among broader topics and offer an opportunity to demonstrate the aesthetic range within the dance field. This dancing conversation is the compilation of a series of TWISTalks connected to Adele Myers and Dancers' new dance theater project, TWIST. TWISTalks are nationwide virtual gatherings of women on a national scale who share, listen, laugh, and twist against disempowering ways we move through the world in our daily choreographies. Developed with support from NCC Akron's Satellite Residency Program, TWISTalks are the creative research and community engagement aspect of TWIST. NCC Akron satellite residencies reach beyond traditional limitations of time, space, and place to support artists wherever they are to continue their choreographic research. During this dancing conversation, we'll hear from Adele Myers of Adele Myers and Dancers, Dr. Tracy Alloway, an award-winning psychologist and author of Think Like a Girl, and Toranika Washington, a somatic educator, leadership coach, and the founder of Somatic Soul Food. They will participate in a panel discussion moderated by Annie Hoffman, the Education and Outreach Manager at South Miami Dade Cultural Arts Center.
Hi, thanks for tuning in to this TWIST Talk called We Three Queens of Mind and Body. My name is Annie Hoffman, and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center. I'm so honored to be serving as the moderator today for this exciting panel conversation in support of Adele Myers and Dancers' upcoming performances of TWIST, April 8th through the 10th at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center. To get us started this evening, I would like to introduce Adele Myers, who is the artistic director and founder of Adele Myers and Dancers, who's going to share a little bit with us about why we're gathering today. Adele?
Thank you, Annie, and good evening. So as Annie mentioned, my name is Adele Myers, and I am the artistic director of Adele Myers and Dancers. We are a Miami-based national touring dance theater company made up of 5 female athletes of the heart. And for the past 2 years, we have been a commissioned company in residence at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center, where we have been developing our new dance theater work, TWIST. TWIST is an acronym for These Women in Space and Time. And as a live dance theater performance, it offers a variety of acts of female solidarity with our company's signature blend of personal theatricality and foot stomping, soul quaking, elegant athleticism. Now, TWIST was inspired by 2 personal experiences. The first experience was when I attended the 2017 Women's March. I was completely overcome by the power of the collective chemistry with those thousands of people coming together in solidarity, and also the sea of a variety of shades of pink. So that first experience inspired Act 2 of TWIST. The second experience was seemingly mundane at first, in that I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was reading the newspaper in a door frame. I was walking from one room to the other room, and then I realized mid-conversation that I had shrunk my body so that I wouldn't inconvenience him while he was reading the paper. My immediate reaction was to roll my eyes, make a snarky comment, ask why he didn't move, and so on. And then as I walked away, my stomach sank, because I realized what really concerned me in that moment was my own complicity. Why had I internalized an instinct to shrink my body and to take up less space just so I wasn't going to inconvenience someone else? It also got me thinking, how often am I doing this in my daily life, or what I refer to as my daily choreographies, the ways that I'm moving through the world in space and time in relation to other people? So I started having conversations about this experience with friends and then friends of friends. And then suddenly I realized that we all had this in common. And also this question about how much are we internalizing this social conditioning to take up less space and time and giving away our power. Eventually, I decided that I wanted to explore these two personal experiences in the rehearsal studio with a company. So we were investigating a variety of ways that we think about solidarity and how we show up for each other, and also what our relationships are to space, time, and power, particularly as female athletes of the heart and artists. And so with that, I was also interested in continuing the conversations I was having with women. And so with support from NCC Akron, I was able to bring together nationwide virtual gatherings of women for TWISTalks. So I wanted to just formalize these conversations and have us share our experiences as well as listen to one another. And to dig a little bit deeper, I wanted to incorporate two research partners into this project. And the two research partners became the facilitators for these first two TWISTalks that we'll be sharing the information about with you all this evening. And so before I share any more information, I would like to have the research partners please introduce themselves. Let's begin with Toranika Washington and then Dr. Alloway. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening. My name is Toranika Washington of Somatic Soul Food Movement Consulting. I'm a somatic coach and dance educator. And I'd like to talk to you about some events, some really cool events that are coming up with Somatic Soul Food. I'm going to be doing two Somatic Soul Food sessions. And the first one is for faith leaders seeking stress and anxiety relief. It's a spring edition. We meet every quarter. And then the second one is a Live Lighter series. So I'm working on a retreat that I'm going to open up to everyone. And it's to develop your somatic soul food in a sacred space, reduce stress, relieve your anxieties, and learn ways to recover from difficult conditions. In April, I'm really excited to be working with a support group of cancer survivors. So I'm going to be creating movement sequences for them to access more flow and freedom, to get away from that stress and anxiety that they're going through. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Alloway. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I had the pleasure of meeting Adele when I got a chance to see her troupe perform, and it was absolutely stunning to be able to see them in motion like that. And that evening, we had some fantastic conversations about the philosophy of the sort of brain-body connection. My own research interest centers a lot on mental health. I focus on memory. I look at the connection and how our brain directs our mental health as well. A big part of this is distilled in my recent book, Think Like a Girl, where I explore different myths that we hear as women, even myths that we tell ourselves. And I wanted to unpack some of those. And what really interests me is how often our physical space, as Adele mentioned just now, can impact on mental health. And I'm excited to talk more about that today with all of you too.
Well, I could not be more excited because I was lucky enough that I got to participate in the first two TWISTalks that we have been sharing a little bit about. And as Adele had mentioned, those were some kind of little intimate gatherings where we were able to get to know one another. And so today we wanted to open up to a larger audience and share a little bit about what some of the learnings were from those first two TWISTalks. And so I want to revisit a little bit. And Dr. Alloway, I want to go back in time and talk a little bit about the first TWISTalk that you helped kick us off. That one was called Embodied Cognition, How the Body Trains the Brain. And I wanted to touch upon a couple of points that we learned about, things that to share with our audience today. One of those things that you talked a little bit about was something called reverse engineering. And I wanted to know if you can tell us a little bit about what that means, what reverse engineering means, and how it can be used or accessed in that body-mind connection that you were just sharing a little bit about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Annie. I appreciate that. Oftentimes, we notice when our body starts manifesting or demonstrating or exhibiting certain signs of mental stress. So we know that when we feel stressed, our shoulders may roll in a little bit. We have maybe tension, headaches, and starting in our shoulder, and it moves up to our head. So we're pretty aware, I think, as individuals of where the brain is affecting our body. But really, what I wanted to do is flip the script a little bit and reverse engineer that to be able to say, well, are we aware that our body can actually communicate this idea to our brain? And it's this idea of embodied cognition. And it's based on a large field of research. Both psychology draws from psychology as well as philosophy. But again, this idea that even our language often reflects the way in which our body communicates. We say, oh, look up. And, we kind of follow along that way, or look ahead. And so even the language that we use, and this was part of my PhD thesis as well, where we can detect certain phrases that we use, certain metaphors that we use that are all really grounded in the way in which we use our body. And so in the context of mental health, I'm interested in sharing this idea that our body can communicate and reverse engineer to our brain. So in other words, our body isn't held ransom just to our mental health challenges that we might experience, that there's a way that we can demonstrate some agency, that we can adopt certain things physically to communicate to our brain that, hey, I'm going to trick you a little bit, but here's the message that I would like you to live with, to demonstrate, to exhibit, rather than me, the body, simply expressing some of the stress, some of the anxiety, the depression that we're experiencing.
And I think that's such an important skill for people to have in their toolbox, just thinking about all that everyone has been going through the past couple of years. Being able to tap into that way is such an important thing. So it was awesome that you shared a little bit about something that we can use in our daily lives. One other thing that you actually just mentioned, but that I wanted to also kind of talk a little bit more about, was something that you just talked about called embodiment. Specifically, I remember in the first TWISTalk, we learned about, I think it's called the power pose, which is that one where you are kind of standing and you put your hands on your hips. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Some people call it the Wonder Woman pose or the Superman pose, but you're absolutely right, Annie. It is the posture where you put your hands on your hips. You're standing strong. Your shoulders are back as far as it can go. You're upright. But there's research to show that not only does this affect our physiology, which is really powerful. So studies have shown that even just 2 minutes of power posing like that, standing in this very strong Wonder Woman, Superman pose, actually decreases our cortisol level, and cortisol is a stress hormone. So just imagine that you're feeling overwhelmed, and in 2 minutes of doing that, you can see a significant reduction to your stress levels. But it also changed the confidence levels of the individual. So they reported feeling more confident, more able. So it also shifts our mindset, which is incredibly powerful. For me, what's interesting was that as a researcher, there's also studies to show that, maybe in a meeting, you don't feel comfortable kind of standing up and power posing in front of everybody. But related research has shown that sitting in a powerful posture, or in a power pose posture, where you don't have to even have your hands on your hips, but sitting in that upright posture, your shoulders back. So, we often find ourselves, especially if we've been sitting for a while, if we're disengaging, we're kind of slumped forward, maybe leaning in a little bit. And this does not communicate a sense of confidence. Even in our own brain. And so just simply shifting that posture a little bit, pushing your shoulders back, research has shown that this communicates a powerful message to your brain. And participants reported not only feeling more confident, but they also identified more positive attributes when they were given a project. So previously, when they were just, sitting in a more relaxed stance and they were given a project, they tended to identify a lot of negative attributes, a lot of, I'm not sure I can handle this. I don't know if I have the skill set, the competence to do so. But simply by asking them to change their posture, their mindset shifted. And they were starting to endorse and identify more positive attributes that they possessed in order to complete the project. And this is powerful, not just in a research setting. As a licensed psychologist, I use this with my clients. I had a male client come to me and express feeling very frustrated that his superiors were kind of talking down to them, and he felt like he was being treated like a child. But because of the way the structure was, he didn't feel comfortable expressing that. And I said, well, change your posture. The easiest way to at least feel confident is to, instead of starting to pull your whole body in and starting to feel like that child where you're kind of drawing in and cowering, change that. And in our next session, he reported back that it helped him change his mindset, that he was able to move from feeling angry, feeling like that anger was then seeping into these sarcastic, snarky comments and then getting him in trouble professionally. He was able to recognize, I don't like this manner of conversation. However, my sense of agency is I can shift my body. I can change the way I am receiving this input so that I'm not acting like a child kind of cowering in the corner. And so we know it's powerful in two levels, not just research, but also I see that play out in everyday life for individuals reporting that they're noticing a difference in their lives as well.
And I wonder if does that also work? I know you're sharing a little bit about like that these are some confidence-based poses, but I'm wondering if someone is feeling really anxious or kind of feeling like in an overwhelmed state, that are there certain positions that help to produce relaxation, kind of, or movements, I should say?
That's a really interesting question, Annie. And looking at relaxation is a different kind of mindset from the confidence mindset that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And again, research shows that the simplest thing to do is pretend like you're blowing a bubble. And the reason for that is because it really forces you to take that deep diaphragm-based breath. And again, there's lots of research to show that deep breath helps. So even with my clients who are children, I always have bubbles handy, and we do that. We blow bubbles together, we blow balloons together, because it forces you where you might just say, okay, fine, I'm breathing. Is this good? Am I done now? And we just kind of want to take the shortcut. Our brains are efficient. We naturally gravitate to being efficient in that way. But when you're forced to blow a bubble, having that to hand, or blow up a balloon, you're forcing your body to take that deep sort of deep breath in that way. And again, it's your body's way of communicating to your brain, hey, take a moment, we don't need to respond right now. And I do often, kind of along this idea of anxiety, a lot of clients will also report that they have a nervous habit that again transcends to our physical space. So our brain, feeling anxious, communicates to our body, we have to fidget. Some people will do something with their fingers, or they'll kind of jolt their legs up and down, or they may pace. And that is effective. It is your body's way to naturally get rid of this access of anxiety. And that's great, a great way to do that. It's effective, certainly. But oftentimes I'll have clients say, I'm in the middle of the meeting, or I'm about to do a presentation. I really can't be, pacing or doing things like that. And just using the body then to calm yourself by doing a self-soothing gesture. And oftentimes I'll work with the client to find out what that gesture might look like that's authentic to them. So for some people, they find that actually one client was an individual on the autism spectrum and used to do a lot of theater. And he said that he would curl up his toes in his shoes because no one could see that. So he would curl it up and then release it, rather than biting his nails, which he wanted to discontinue. He didn't really want to be up there in a nervous and anxiety-induced situation where he was gnawing on his fingernails like that. And so he found it that for him, being able to know that I can release this energy, I can use my body to kind of calm my brain in this way, using his feet and toes to curl back and forth where no one could see that, was helpful for him. For some other people, it's just a simple gesture where they just put their hand on their chest like that. For other people, they may put their hand in their pocket and then do a self-soothing gesture in their pocket so it's not visible. But again, here, there's lots of research-based tips that the individual can use as a way to calm themselves down, to tell their brain, I know we have a lot of, an excess of anxiety biting right now, and I'm going to make sure we get rid of it in a way that they feel is authentic to themselves as the individual, and the way they feel comfortable demonstrating that, rather than that nervous energy where they may bite their nails or do something perhaps unhealthy or uncomfortable for them.
Right. That's great. So another thing that I just wanted to talk with you about was something that we talked about, again, going back to the first talk, something called proprioceptive awareness. Can you tell us a little bit about what proprioceptive awareness is?
Yes, so proprioception refers to your awareness of your body's position in space. So when we jump, for example, we have to mark where we intend to land and then plan accordingly. When you throw a ball, you're using proprioception where you have to figure out where's my hand in space? Where do I want to move my hand so that I can pitch the ball to the location I want it to? And that's just, proprioception is really a fancy way for us to use our visual skills to adjust our physical space. We use proprioception when we climb, when we crawl, even when we walk, when you have the individual that's kind of falling off the sidewalk or tripping. It could be that they're not being proprioceptively aware. As children, this is almost second nature to us. You see children on the playground, they're scrambling around. This is instinctual for them. They don't have to stop and cognitively think, where do I need to place my hands? Where do I need to place my feet right now? A lot of this is, especially children who are encouraged to play outside or encouraged to free play a lot of times, they tend to have very strong proprioceptive skills. Again, people who rock climb have to have good, adults and children who rock climb have really good proprioceptive skills, because you're constantly judging the distance of where your body needs to be versus where it is and how to move to a safe location. In my own research, I mentioned that I am interested in memory. And I wanted to know how proprioception can improve our memory abilities. And so I had a chance to work with an organization that works with what's called natural movement. So the big premise here is that we want to be able to focus on moving our body naturally, bear crawling on the sand, kind of moving around, the things that we would do as children on a playground, those monkey bars where you're kind of swinging, even balancing, finding the thinnest possible a little raised wood and trying to walk on that. Or as a kid where you jump across little sidewalk pieces and say, don't step on the cracks, it's the lava that's going to get you, and just those kinds of things. And so we had a chance to look at that from a research setting. I worked with this organization where we recruited adults who had never engaged in these specific types of proprioceptive activities, bear crawls, climbing, and so on in their adult life. And they did that for 2 hours. And I compared that with another group of adults who was engaging in yoga, but it was stationary. So think of hatha yoga, where you focus a lot on your breath and not so much on your physical movement. And then we had a final group that was what I called my cognitive learning group. So really what I was trying to do, what I wanted to do here was tease apart, if we do see any benefits to memory, is it because we're learning something? Is it because we're moving? Is it because we're breathing while we're moving? What exactly is this piece that we can distill that can impact our memory? And so that's the reason I had what's a third, I called a control group, that were individuals who were learning cognitive information for 2 hours, but they were stationary. So they were seated the entire time. No movement, no breath work, no gauging and tracking their body's position in space, but they were being cognitively engaged. Everything that they were taking in was new information for them. And what I found was that the group of individuals who were engaging in the proprioceptively dynamic activities, so they were aware of their body's position in space, but moving, they showed a significant improvement to their memory. And I was looking at a specific type of memory that researchers called working memory. I like to describe it as active memory. When you meet someone and you have a conversation, that's working memory. You're listening to their name, you're matching up what you might have heard about them, you're bringing in those two pieces of information, you're trying to think of things from your long-term memory to say, what questions can I ask them? How can we connect? What can we use here in this active space? And I found that just a short time of proprioceptively dynamic activities was enough to improve working memory. The same benefits were not evidenced in hatha yoga. So while hatha yoga was involving proprioception, it wasn't dynamic. And there's something about that dynamic movement, potentially because we're increasing blood flow to our prefrontal cortex, which is the home of working memory. That could be one of the reasons why we need that sense of dynamic movement to see benefits to our memory. And I also found that the learning group didn't show the same improvements to working memory. So really, there's a lot to be said for being proprioceptively active. So if you're a parent and you've taken your children to the park, don't sit down there and scroll, on your phone, looking at social media. Maybe kind of walk around on those wood beams yourself, try to balance a little bit, see how long you make it. Maybe even try to jump from one spot to another, simply marking it yourself, deciding that I want to jump to that spot, and gauging that proprioception in a dynamic way can be helpful for you as well.
This is so interesting. I have like so many follow-up questions and I'm trying to stay on task, but I'll just put something out there. As you're saying all this, I keep thinking of young students in class, right? And I mean, this was me. I tend to be a little bit of a fidgeter. And I noticed that if I'm like doing something with my hands, that I feel like I retain information better. And I wonder if this research that you're talking about could shed some light on if a student is moving around or kind of fidgeting, it doesn't mean that they're not learning, right? It doesn't mean that they're not taking in that information. Maybe they're even they're learning more effectively, right? I think there's something to that could be, I don't know, really helpful for people. So.
Absolutely, Annie. And I'm nodding. You may have noticed I start nodding even more. I'm so excited. A big part of my research looks at education and how this piece also works in an educational setting. And so in this context, we often think of students with ADHD,
Yes.
the fidgeters, the movers. And that's not to say that's you, but in general, students with that kind of behavior tend to fall under that learning need. Yeah. Interesting things are happening in the brain, two things in particular in a student with ADHD. The first thing is the motor cortex is overactive. And this drives this need to move, this need to fidget, where you do see a student with ADHD, even adult ADHD, constantly needing to flip a pen in their fingers like that, need to fidget with something, need to shake their legs, need to kind of walk around a little bit. So they're the ones that pace and think. And that's because that is how their brain is wired. That motor cortex is running. But the second thing that's very interesting is happening in their brain, and that prefrontal cortex, the home of working memory, is underactive. And so a lot of times the phrase "a fast race car with no brakes" is used, where they want to go and they don't have that front of the brain, that conductor, to kind of step in and say, well, hold up, we can't just go racing around the classroom right now. We can't just go, blurting everything out just because it pops in your head. And so again, this symptomology is really characteristic of individuals with ADHD. Now, what's interesting is one of the books that I had a chance to edit. It's a clinical textbook. There's a chapter on ADHD and memory. And the colleague who contributed did a study where he put foot trackers to track movement of young children with ADHD. And he also did that same foot tracker on students without a clinical diagnosis of ADHD. And he just tracked them for a day. He had a baseline of their memory and their learning at the beginning of the day, tracked their movement throughout a school day, and then looked at their learning and memory at the end of the day. This is what's so fascinating, that the children with ADHD who moved more based on the tracker learned more. Now, that may seem counterintuitive. Usually the teacher is really working hard to say, sit still, stop moving, don't fidget. And even as parents, we may feel compelled to say, you can't do your homework when you're racing around the kitchen. You've got to sit down, you've got to focus. But in fact, it goes back to how the brain is wired in an individual with ADHD. It is natural for them to move. In other words, they learn better when they're moving because of that hypermotor cortex. And because their prefrontal cortex, that working memory, is underperforming, if we're trying to tell them, hey, you've got to sit still, you've got to focus, then they're diverting their cognitive resources to try to control this physical movement that's dispersing to get out. And they don't have a lot left to actually learn and focus. So I'm excited to share that a lot of schools I work with will actually provide opportunities for students like this, with standing desks, with those big bouncing balls where they can take breaks, different kinds of fidget hand movements to kind of help them get their energy out. So I'm really excited to report that schools are becoming more aware of this, and certainly parents can ask for that too as part of a 504 or an IEP, a behavior plan for their child if they believe that they have a diagnosis of ADHD.
I'm just thrilled to hear that. I think that what you're sharing can really, I'm just thinking of like so many folks that if they're able to hear this information or they can kind of see some of that research, it could really undo a lot of shame and like, myths about learning. So it's really exciting to hear. Thank you so much, Dr. Alloway, for sharing that with us. So.
Thank you, Annie.
So, I want to bring in Toranika Washington to talk a little bit about our second twist talk that was called Shape Shifting Habits. Don't Shrink Yourself to Make Others Comfortable. So, Toranika, there's a couple things that I wanted to kind of focus on that I learned in the second talk with you. One of those concepts was you talked about the shrinking body and the curious body. And I loved learning about that. And I wondered if you could share a little bit with us here about what you mean by the shrinking body and the curious body.
Sure. So the shrinking body is the unique way that the body shape shifts in response to undesirable situations. So it happens when the brain identifies a situation as a potential threat. And inside the body, that might feel like your stomach twisting or your heart swelling or filling up. The body may feel weighted or heavy, or it may feel like a sudden vacancy in the body. Think of and also feel like the right or left side of the body is pulling in the opposite direction. From the outside of the body, it may look like pulling back, flinching, cringing, or wincing. So, and then the body closing in or folding in on itself like a narrow shape, making a narrow shape. Things like hide and go seek and hiding behind a tree trunk that's very narrow and making yourself as thin as you possibly can. Or the other way is creating yourself in a little ball. So you're making the tiniest part of you.
So those are some of the things that we might notice or observe or do in the shrinking body, right?
Yeah.
So, and then what might we notice in the curious body? How would we recognize the curious body?
That may look like head tilting, right? Or head nodding is what you're doing right now, nodding. Raising the eyebrows, leaning into what someone is saying, maybe a smile every now and then, sliding your chair a little bit closer to someone or giving someone the ear, right? It could be the eyes wide open, listening in and trying to take in everything outside of the body and bringing it in. Hand gestures are great to explain and communicate, right? Pushing your glasses up, leaning in, resting your neck on your hand here, kind of things work as well. But inside the body, it feels like a magnetic connection. So it feels like the source is tugging or pulling at you. And the sensation is like watching a really good movie or watching a performance on stage, and that feeling that you get. Having a great conversation with a friend. It's feeling a little bit light. There's rhythm and flow with it.
I'm wondering, I'm kind of thinking back to what we had just talked about with Dr. Alloway and kind of the like that power pose. Do you feel like the curious body could be something that if someone was feeling anxious or maybe they noticed that they were in that shrinking body, do you feel that if they kind of started to do some of these movements that you just described in the curious body, do you feel like that might shift them into maybe feeling less anxious and just being more curious?
I do, because being in an active state of curiosity reduces the gaps in knowledge. So it gives you an opportunity to become your own sort of FBI agent and concierge. So you get to go on this great journey of discovery and find new ways to take better care of yourself and create more ease in your life for healing, reducing stress, reducing anxiety. And we live in this evolving world that shifts and changes, so we kind of have to evolve with it. So if we use the curious state of with these things. And if you think of it that way, your body is more of a partner that helps you maneuver through life.
What you just said there is so powerful. I feel like so many of us, I would venture to say that most people don't think of their body as a partner, right? And if we had that mind shift, really, I just feel like that would be life changing. It's such a powerful statement that you just said. So another thing that we talked a little bit about in our second twist talk was you talked a little bit about alert systems in the body, right? And physical sensations. If again, just being tuned in what's happening with our body. So I think you had talked about these as being ways that our body is providing us with information about what's happening. So I was wondering if there's like a connection between maybe if someone has a heightened awareness of these kind of alert systems. Do you think that that might help them move through the world with a curious versus a shrinking body? Like, what might that relationship be like?
I do. I think that if we make being inquisitive a habit, by observing, actively listening, making plans, and taking action, I think that if we're persistent with these things, we can recognize what doesn't work for us and consider several new approaches for trying to overcome stress and anxiety and the things that are coming against us in life.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that I'm just thinking that so oftentimes, fear or anxiety or focusing on this what if kind of mentality can, as you're saying, like can cause people to get into that shrinking body and to shrink away from life. But if we think about what if and we kind of get into those body poses, those movements, those gestures that are curiosity, what if can take on a whole different meaning, right? Like, yeah, what if? What if something great happens? What if I learn something? What if I meet someone? So I just find what you're saying to be so accessible, in terms of shifting, right? To being more curious, to getting out there, to being open. I love it.
Yeah, I think that one thing is it doesn't have to be grandiose, right? So it can be just something as simple as getting up in the morning. And if you're right side heavy, and so what that means to say is you do everything with your right side, try putting on your shoes with the left foot first. Try, try washing your dishes in a different way. Try taking a new route to work. It can be so simple, and it opens up the portals to creativity. It opens up the portals to new ideas. It gets you information and gives you an opportunity to share information as well. So
awesome. I love that, focusing on those small steps, because that's way more achievable and less overwhelming than thinking about something, making a big shift like that. So thanks for pointing that out. So Toranika, again, I could keep having so many more questions for you, but I do want to shift our focus a little bit. I actually want to put a little break into all of our talking, and I want to share a clip that is an excerpt from the upcoming work that is going to be shown in just a few weeks at the South Miami Dade Cultural Arts Center. So I want to share a short clip of an excerpt from TWIST, and then once that's done, we'll come back. is so excited about this work, and you just saw a little sneak peek of what's to come. I'd like to bring Adele back into the conversation to kind of focus a little bit about what's coming up, right? So, Adele, I wanted to ask you, what are some specific examples and ways that you have applied this kind of blended form of activism and research that you shared with us in the beginning of our conversation today? How has this approach informed the way that you've been working with the company in this final phase of development?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say thank you for really making that nod about TWISTalks being a type of form of activism, because they are at once an act of female solidarity, where women are coming together to share their lived experiences, to listen to one another, and to collectively brainstorm ways that we can make different kinds of decisions as we move through the world. And so I appreciate that. And then the way that we brought this into the rehearsal process was, for example, I will say the lived experience of being at the Women's March led to my conversations, for example, with the costume designer. And we both read this book called The History of Pink. And we wanted to think about the politics and the socio-political implications of that color. And that's how she started thinking about the costumes for the design you just saw. So Pangia Kaliverga is the name of the costume designer. Similarly, I was working with the composer, who is Ian de la Cruz, AKA Blind Carbon Copy. And I was interested in saying, how can you create this environment, this sense of this energy and this chemistry at this protest, but almost like it's somewhere between a protest and a parade. And so he was able to do that sonically, to create a state of being. And then within that, I bring the conversations that we've had specifically in these TWISTalks. So now we have this environment, we have what we're wearing, we have conversations with the lighting designer, for example. And in thinking about the shrinking body and the curious body in particular, in the first act, one of the dancers was attended Toranika's TWISTalk. And both of us were like, the curious body, because we had been trying to find out. There's this moment where the lighting designer has created a shaft of light that is so narrow the dancer can barely move in it. And the word that kept coming up with for that was shrinking. And the soundscape it's like a woman who's walking in heels on a marble floor in a very echoey chamber. So you just have this sense of confinement, but also like this hollow echo. And so I was thinking about this moment when Toranika started talking about the curious body, because the dancer and I had this conversation around what happens when you have an instinct to pull out of what is so familiar and so known, that narrow shaft of light, that taking up so little space, but yet you don't know what you're moving into, this unfamiliar terrain, because you have been socially conditioned to always take up as little space as possible. And so we started bringing this concept of the curious body to the rehearsal process. So maybe more as a director. So I said, okay, well, what if you approach this? The lighting designer expands the space. So you go from a shaft of light to this huge expanse of space. And the invitation I gave to her is approach this moment of being in as much space as possible, filling as much space as possible with a curious body. Where does that take you? And where it took her was exquisite, and not something that I was leaning toward until Toranika was talking about the curious body. And so then we were also thinking, well, what happens then when you take this kind of approach outside of the dance studio, moving through the world with a curious body that is not about being constrained and polite, but it's not about rude. It's not in this binary. It's really about expansive investigation of your potential, because we've internalized this other way of moving through the world. We have no clue what our potential is. Right. And so it became a curiosity as a type of investigation. Another way that we brought some of these conversations into the rehearsal process specifically was the gesture. Dr. Alloway was talking about the self-care. Now, interestingly enough, this gesture had already been in the work before these TWISTalks. And it was around self-care. But just recently in our final residency, I remembered Dr. Alloway talking about, I think you were saying something about the female brain being hardwired to care and protect. And there's this one section in Act 1 of TWIST where all the dancers are very close together and they're drawn around this one dancer. And we started having conversations about what is the intention here. The intention is collective caring. The intention is around collective protection. And there's this one moment where they're like really slowly pushing away at a force together. And I talked to them about there's you pushing by yourself, and there's this collective care of all of you using everything you have to push away. And so there's so much more power in that moment of the collectivity. And so it's like collective protection, collective care. But I also love the fact that you brought this back to what this is, because when they have this gesture on the stage, you feel that. And it's just also that kind of reminder in that way. I also am thinking about the beyond the live performance, right? Beyond the live performance. I think that I'm really interested in continuing to take these ideas to develop a workshop, particularly around the specific conversation in the TWISTalk that we had this evening. So I'm interested in this reverse engineering and the power pose and having more conversations about that, because as a choreographer, I can have a visual and I can think, oh, this would be an interesting way to investigate this with people who may or may not be movers. I could see a way to investigate this further. So I'd like to have more conversations around that. And I would like to have more conversations around the proprioceptive awareness and how we can start to take that into our daily lives. When I was talking about at the very beginning, what inspired this work, and about how bringing in what Toranika was saying about these alert systems. If we could start to pay attention to those alert systems, and then that would kind of kick us off to thinking about our proprioceptive awareness, like what we're seeing and how we're automatically internalizing with our little choreographies to shift ourselves in certain ways, we might make different decisions. So it's bringing that awareness. So to summarize, what I'm saying is I think this research has very much informed the way that I've directed the work, the conversations that the dancers and I have had about their intention, about how they're approaching their relationship to space and time. And it's also about the energy. It's about turning up and down your presence in that way as well. And then also how we take this, behind the scenes and off the stage into workshops, and then also into the way that we are moving through the world in our daily lives. So I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I will say just to get back to the discussion around TWIST, I think the clip that you all saw is a prime example of, how a lived experience at a protest can go through all these conversations, all this kind of research over a 2-year period of time, and emerge as a new alternative to how we collectively move through space and time with one another, and also ways that we can pay attention to how we empower ourselves in space and time as well.
I am so excited right now. This conversation has been so wonderful. And then just hearing you share a little bit about the work, seeing the work, and remembering, and I've been privileged where I've been able to see little snippets of the work over the past few years. And some of the images that you just described are just so exciting. And particularly one that I was struck by when you were talking about that, the narrow passage of light. I kept thinking about what Toranika was sharing about in the curious body, and then that light getting bigger. And that's like such a metaphor for when we can use some of these tools, these skills, when we can view our bodies as our partners. Like, yes, the light expands, and it's just, I don't know, I have chills right now. Anyway.
Yeah. And I do want to share, Kathy Couch is the line designer for this work, and I've been working with her. I believe this is our third project. And what I appreciate about working with her as another type of research partner is we do talk about the lighting design as another performer. And everything you are seeing in live performance conveys meaning. So you're not giving the answer, right? And you're not making it so mysterious that it's not like, what am I looking at? I don't get it. It's about putting all these pieces together in a particular way to invite you into this lived experience and say, what are you experiencing and how is it making you feel? And what is it making you think about? And really, that's what I'm mostly interested is that invitation. And let's do that together. I'm interested in what happens to our chemistry in the live performance in that moment. And I do want to also say that it's important for me to say thank you and to acknowledge that TWIST is made possible in part by very generous commissions from the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center and from the Yard and from a grant from the National Dance Project Production Grant, as well, of course, as research support from NCC Akron Satellite Residency Program. So thank you all so much for helping me take this one lived experience that turned into an inquiry, that turned into art, that turned into TWISTalks, that turned into this culminating moment where we can all be together in space and time and twist against disempowerment.
Well, I just can't wait. This has just been so wonderful, and I want to thank everyone just for sharing your time with me this evening. I really enjoyed these conversations. Thank you so much, Toranika. Thank you, Dr. Alloway. Thank you, Adele. I also want to thank our hidden partners right now, but there's been a lot of support in this conversation technical wise. So thank you to everyone who's doing all the technical stuff. And I also want to thank NCC Akron for their support and their partnership. I hope that everyone is super pumped up for these performances that are happening April 8th, 9th, and 10th at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center. If you are in town or if you now feel compelled to buy a plane ticket and come down, we're super excited to have you there. Tickets are available at smdcac.org. So thank you so much, everyone. And I hope that I see you at these performances.
Thank you to the guest speakers, Dr. Tracy Alloway, Toranika Washington, and Adele Myers, moderator Annie Hoffman, and the tech help throughout the TWISTalk series, Spring Healy. Public programs and events like these are made possible with additional support by the Ohio Arts Council, the GAR Foundation, and the Akron Community Foundation. The establishment and general operation of NCC Akron is made possible by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. The world premiere of TWIST will be presented by South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center, April 8th through 10th, 2022, as the culminating event of a 2-year commissioned residency. Visit the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center website at smdcac.org to purchase tickets. Thank you for engaging in Dance with us. Dance on.